Iran thought it could have its cake and eat it too. It has relied on the Houthis to wreak havoc in the Red Sea for over a year without getting its own hands dirty. Now, the US has had enough. Iran is about to be hit hard as a massive US B-2 bomber deployment prepares to escalate the conflict in the Middle East. US President Donald Trump told Iran that this was coming. Still, Iran wouldn't stop supporting the Houthis, meaning it now faces one of the most terrifying weapons in the United States Air Force. Trump's warning to Iran came on the back of the first 4 days of US airstrikes conducted against the Houthi militant group in Yemen. That group, which has ties to Iran, believed to extend to training and weapons supply, reignited its attacks against container ships and commercial vessels in the Red Sea on March 12. America's response has been to launch daily airstrikes against Houthi targets in Yemen, which Trump says are already proving effective. Tremendous damage has been inflicted upon the Houthi barbarians, and watch how it will get progressively worse, Trump posted to his social media site on March 19. It's not even a fair fight, and it never will be. They will be completely annihilated. While these comments may seem like bragging on the part of the US president, they actually contain a veiled message to Iran. Trump is telling Iran that one of its most important proxies doesn't stand a chance against the US. And he's not just saying it, the US Navy and Air Force are demonstrating that fact. The daily airstrikes in Yemen have killed at least 53 people and injured over 100 more, with the US claiming that it's managed to take out several members of the Houthi leadership already. And if there was any doubt about Trump's true target with these strikes, he cleared all of that up on March 19. In a separate Truth Social post, the US president said, "Iran must stop the sending of these supplies immediately. Let the Houthis fight it out themselves. Either way, they lose, but this way they lose quickly." And in a March 17 post, Trump then delivered his most direct warning yet. Every shot fired by the Houthis will be looked upon from this point forward as being a shot fired from the weapons and leadership of Iran, and Iran will be held responsible and suffer the consequences, and those consequences will be dire. Did the US just declare war on Iran? Not quite. But Trump has sent a message that the US isn't going to stand by and watch as Iran funds and supports the Houthis in the militant group's Red Sea campaign. And again, these aren't empty words from Trump. He's following through on his promises of more strikes against the Houthis in Yemen. And perhaps more importantly, he's following through on the threats he's making against Iran. How? As we speak, the US is transporting B-2 stealth bombers to a military facility that is within range of Iran. On March 26, the War Zone, or TWZ, posted a report claiming that a significant force of B-2 Spirit stealth bombers looks to be currently making its way to the Indian Ocean island of Diego Garcia. It cites satellite imagery from the previous 48 hours that seems to demonstrate that the US is amassing what could become a powerful fighting force on the UK-owned island. Diego Garcia is an interesting place. The BBC reports that it's a remote island nestled in the Indian Ocean, and to the outside observer, it might look like paradise on Earth. Lush vegetation sprouts from its fertile ground. Stunning and practically untouched white sand beaches taper off into crystal clear ocean waters. And as a holiday destination, it has the potential to become one of the most desirable getaways in the entire world. But the island isn't used for such leisurely purposes. Instead, it's the home of a US Navy support facility that gives the US eyes and ears in the Indian Ocean. The island is leased to the US by the UK, with the most recent lease renewal allowing the US to essentially use this tiny slice of paradise for whatever purposes it deems fit until 2036. Prior to March 2025, the island was home to several branch units of the United States military. These include a specific Diego Garcia detachment of the US Navy, along with the 36th Wing of the 11th Air Force of the US Pacific Air Forces. It even has a Space Operations Contingent, with the 20th Space Control Squadron of Space Operations Command calling the island its home, along with the 21st Space Operations Squadron of Space Delta 6. Add detachments from the US Air Force's 515th Air Mobility Operations Wing to that list, as well as several supporting groups, and you get a remote island that's been transformed into one of the US's key Asian military bases. Those branch groups are still there. They're just being joined now by some of America's most powerful bombers. The US itself provides scant few details about what goes on at the base. According to the military installations website, entry to Diego Garcia is restricted, requiring area clearance by US Navy support facility Diego Garcia. Only unaccompanied military and Department of Defense civilian personnel or authorized contractors may be assigned to the island. In other words, nobody gets on or off Diego Garcia without express permission from the US military. So much for that vacation. US military personnel typically embark on a one-year tour if they're assigned to the island, with extensions only available to officers and enlisted personnel in special circumstances. Civilians allowed onto the island often stay longer, with military installations noting that some have been on the island facility for over 15 years. But all of this is standard operating procedure for the Diego Garcia military base. What we're seeing now is much different. TWC says that a combination of radio chatter and satellite imagery confirms that the US is sending B-2 bombers to Diego Garcia. The first signs came on March 25, with satellite imagery demonstrating that at least 3 C-17 cargo planes had made their way to the island alongside 10 aerial refueling tankers. Both are important to any future B-2 bombing runs, given that the island is about 1,000 miles away from the next nearest landmass. The refueling tankers will play key roles in keeping America's B-2s airborne for any strike missions conducted against Iran. As for the cargo planes, they're doing exactly what the name suggests, shipping vital cargo to Diego Garcia to ensure the B-2s have everything they need for their bombing runs. Radio chatter has also revealed what the US is planning. TWZ says that 2 B-2 bomber crews operating under the call signs Pitch 11 and Pitch 14 were heard communicating with Australian Air Traffic Control in March. That radio conversation, which is publicly available, also confirmed the presence of a third B-2, though that aircraft's crew wasn't involved in the conversation. The trio of US bombers then stopped off in Australia, where they refueled before continuing their journey to Diego Garcia. This aspect of the TWZ report is interesting. It shows that the US isn't attempting to keep the B-2's movements a secret, reinforcing the idea that it's trying to project force against Iran. More radio chatter comes from other B-2s. A fourth, operating under the call sign Pitch 13, appears to be en route to Diego Garcia before having to make an emergency landing at Hawaii's Hickam Air Force Base. TWC says that we don't know the nature of that emergency yet, though images shared on Twitter show that the bomber was met on the tarmac by a crashed truck. More air traffic radio chatter came from another B-2 with the call sign ABBA. Typically stationed at Missouri's Whiteman Air Force Base, that bomber is also en route to Diego Garcia. Whether it's serving as a replacement for Pitch 13 or was also intended to make this journey isn't known. If it's the latter, that makes 5 B-2s either on Diego Garcia or heading to the island. That's a quarter of the 20 B-2 bombers currently stationed at the Whiteman base, which is also the US Air Force's full stock of B-2s. If there was any doubt about where these B-2s were heading, it was all dispelled by two things: a later TWZ update and comments from the United States. On March 26, TWZ confirmed that satellite images obtained from Planet Labs show that there were at least 3 B-2s on Diego Garcia. Those images also revealed even more equipment being amassed on the island, including another C-17 cargo plane, 7 KC-135 aerial tankers, and what appears to be a P-8A Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft. The latter is a plane that the US Navy uses to conduct reconnaissance for anti-submarine warfare and anti-surface warfare. It's likely the P-8A is on Diego Garcia so that it can conduct scouting runs and information gathering to support any future B-2 missions against Iran in the future. Other signs that the US is bringing more B-2s to Diego Garcia include the temporary closing of several of the airfield's taxiways, with a notice stating that those closures are in place until at least April 27. Those closures may be a result of a number of the island's aircraft now being parked on the base's main apron, said TWZ. However, it's the comments from the US that truly confirm what's happening. Some of those comments are obscure. For instance, March 26 saw White House Deputy Chief of Staff Dan Scavino post a short video of a B-2 to his X account, along with the caption, "B-2 Spirit Stealth Bomber." The post doesn't say much on its own, but it could be a subtle signal about what the US is doing on Diego Garcia. More concrete, though also not a direct confirmation of the B-2's arrival on Diego Garcia, comes from Air Force Global Strike Command, or AFGSC. When asked by TWZ about the Pitch 13 bomber's emergency landing, it responded, "A B-2 Spirit bomber arrived at Hickam Air Force Base. U.S. Strategic Command, its components, and subordinate units routinely conduct global operations in coordination with other combatant command services and participating U.S. government agencies to deter, detect, and if necessary, defeat strategic attacks against the United States and its allies. To preserve operational security, we do not discuss details about exercises or operations." That may be the case. However, there are clues in this seemingly boilerplate statement that may give the game away. AFGSC didn't need to mention its coordination with other countries, for instance. We know that Diego Garcia is operated by the UK and that 3 B-2s stopped off in Australia to refuel. Perhaps there's a hint of AFGSC trying to get ahead of any follow-up questions in the statement. Add to all of this, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth's extension of the USS Harry S. Truman's stay in the Red Sea, which we now know is linked to the airstrikes the US is conducting in Yemen. That aircraft carrier is set to be joined by the USS Carl Vinson, another aircraft carrier, along with a small fleet of destroyers in the coming days. It all amounts to the US building the strongest combined aerial and naval force near Iran that it's employed for quite some time. Which begs the question, what does all of this mean for Iran? In the immediate sense, Iran will be very concerned about the arrival of B-2s on Diego Garcia, because the aircraft are among the most advanced that the US has in its arsenal. Northrop Grumman, which builds the B-2, provides some basic details about the bomber's specifications. It's piloted by 2 people and can reach high subsonic speeds. No specifics are provided, though this description likely means the B-2's top speed falls within the Mach 0.8 to Mach 1 range, slightly lower than the speed of sound, but still fast enough to outpace most aircraft outside of fighter jets. The bomber has a 50,000-foot combat ceiling and can fly for up to 6,000 nautical miles without needing to refuel. Diego Garcia is over 3,000 miles away from Iran's southern edge, meaning that range is just barely enough for the B-2 to make it to the country and back to the island. However, the B-2's range climbs to 10,000 nautical miles with a single aerial refueling, reinforcing the reasons why we're also seeing aerial tankers arrive at Diego Garcia. As for weapons, the B-2 can carry either conventional bombs or nuclear warheads. It's also an expensive aircraft. In terms of conventional weapons, the bomber can carry up to 80 500-pound Mk-62C mines for naval purposes, or the same amount of Mk-82 ground bombs. Alternatively, it can be loaded with JDAMs for ground assaults, up to 16 Mk-82 2,000-pound bombs, or a host of other munitions. If the US were to go down the nuclear route in a war with Iran, it could load the bombers with 16 of its B-61-7, B-61-12 or B-83 nukes, or up to 8 of its B-61-11 nuclear bombs. The latter is a ground-penetrating and bunker-busting nuke with a yield of 400 kilotons, more than enough to devastate most Iranian cities. The US Air Force website also says that the B-2 has a $1.157 billion unit cost, meaning the US has just transferred over $5 billion of hardware to Diego Garcia, even before accounting for cargo transports, tankers, and other supporting equipment. Frankly, the B-2 is among the most terrifying aircraft the US has, and if Iran sees it flying over its skies, it could be a signal that explosive devastation is incoming. Which brings us to another question. How does the US plan to use its amassed B-2s? We don't have any direct answers from the US military, which has already said that it won't provide any details about specific operations. We can also practically rule out the possibility of the US nuking Iran with its B-2s, as that would only happen if Iran launched a nuclear weapon at the US, which is extremely unlikely. Instead, it seems likely that the US is mostly attempting to project power against Iran with this B-2 deployment. TWZ notes that the last time the US sent a large contingent of B-2 bombers anywhere was in 2022. It sent 4 of the aircraft to the RAAF base Amberley to support the deployment of the Pacific Air Force's Bomber Task Force in a move that was seen as an American attempt to put the squeeze on China. The deployment was essentially a warning to Beijing, with the US communicating that it still had plenty of influence in the Indo-Pacific region. This also isn't the first time that the US has sent a large contingent contingent of its bombers to Diego Garcia. It also did it in 2020, following the US military's successful operation to kill Qasem Soleimani, the former head of the Iran Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps Quds Force. That time, the US sent 6 B-52s, likely as a way to tell Iran that it would be very unwise to seek any sort of revenge for the operation. Going even further back, the US also used Diego Garcia, along with several other bases in the Indian Ocean, to launch bombing strikes during the initial phases of Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan. That's where the power projection comes into play. The US knows that it's been able to use B-2s on Diego Garcia to calm Iran's collective temper before. It also has a history of using the island to launch successful bombing campaigns against countries very close to Iran, particularly its neighbour Iraq. Worst yet for Iran, the US has used its B-2s against the Houthis in the past. Most recently, October 2024 saw America conduct strikes using its bunker buster bombs to take out key Houthi bases. Again, the signal was sent to Iran. This is what we can do to your proxies, so imagine what we could do to you. The fact that the B-2 is also the only US aircraft certified to carry and deploy the 30,000-pound GBU-57B massive ordnance penetrator bomb, which can decimate deeply buried targets, also shows us that the US is preparing for a fight where Iran's most important officials may try to hide underground. And then there's the range issue. We already know that the US can use its aerial tankers to keep its B-2s in the air long enough for them to reach Iran and get back to Diego Garcia. The same can't be said for any Iranian aircraft or weapons. Iran's primary bomber is the Russian-made and Soviet-era Su-24, which has a maximum range of just 1,864 miles. That's not even enough to get it from Iran's southern top to Diego Garcia, never mind making a return journey. Iran's missiles also can't travel far enough to reach Diego Garcia, according to TWC. It points to research by the Council on Foreign Relations, which notes that Iran's longest-range missile can only travel about 1,240 miles, around half of the distance between Iran and Diego Garcia. All considered, US will be able to attack Iran with its B-2 bombers as and when it feels like it, while Iran will be forced to rely on its limited aerial defenses, which mostly consist of Russian-made S-300s that aren't a match for the B-2. It certainly can't counterattack, as Iran just doesn't have the range in any of its weapons. So what exactly does the US hope to achieve by sending up to a quarter of its B-2s to Diego Garcia? Halting Iranian support of the Houthis is a priority, as Trump has said. The Foundation for Defenses of Democracies says Iran regularly smuggles missiles, drones and bombs into Yemen for the Houthis to use in their Red Sea attacks. In June 2024, the outlet reported that the UK had documented the entry of around 500 ships from Iran into Houthi-controlled ports in Yemen, suggesting that the flow of weapons is large and constant. Trump wants to put a stop to that. But perhaps more importantly, there's a nuclear element to the B-2 deployment on Diego Garcia. On March 7, The Guardian reported on Trump's claims that he'd gotten in touch with Iran to open a dialogue on a new nuclear weapons deal, which will ultimately result in the country accepting that it's not allowed to develop nukes.
I've written him a letter saying, I hope you're going to negotiate, because if we have to go in militarily, it's going to be a terrible thing for them.
The letter reportedly includes a 2-month deadline for Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei to come to the table, which means Trump wants talks to start by the beginning of May. So, the arrival of B-2s is all about applying pressure. The US is telling Iran that it knows Iran doesn't have nukes yet, but the US does, and it can drop them from B-2s that it's keeping out of range of any Iranian counterattacks. The implication is clear. If the nuclear talks either don't happen or don't go Trump's way, the US has the ability to nuke Iran into oblivion. But what do you think about the arrival of B-2s on such a remote island in the Indian Ocean? Is there any chance that the US could actually use them against Iran for either conventional or nuclear attacks? Will Trump's gambit work, leading to Iran cutting support for the Houthis and coming to the table for nuclear discussions? Share your thoughts with us in the comment section, and be sure to subscribe to The Military Show. We're an independent source for news and commentary on the latest developments in this emerging Middle East crisis, plus ongoing developments in Ukraine and elsewhere around the world.